Hey, what's up guys? It's Chuck from MotionApprentice.com again with another Moho quick tip tutorial here. I recently did this project and this is what I based my last tutorial on, but there's another scene in it that I wanted to show you guys how I kind of solved the problem. And that was I was supposed to have a contract being signed by a pen in this animation. So I'm going to show you the little clip here. Goes by pretty quick, but that's what I wanted to show you how to do, that little animation with the pen writing the signature onto the contract. So I haven't run through this since I did the project, so there might be some hiccups along the way, but you know, we'll get through it. If I encounter any hurdles, I'll figure them out and show you what I did. So in Moho here, I'm going to just rename this first layer paper, and I'm going to draw a box out. And for now, I'm going to get rid of the fill on it because in my version, you saw how the camera kind of flew through the contract. So I may do that again, but we'll see. So for this piece of paper, I'm going to kind of turn up the corner here a little bit just to give it a little bit of visual interest. So I just added a couple points to the box, and now I'm going to connect these 2 points down by the corner, and I'm going to select those 2 points and hit U, and that's the create shape tool, and I'm going to create a stroke there. So we have this corner kind of turned up, and this isn't really that important for this tutorial. I just figured, you know, give it a little bit of visual interest. And what you can do is, and what I did subtly in the first one is I actually animated these points so it looked like the piece of paper was unraveling a little bit, or unrolling a little bit. So you can do that as well if you want, but for the purposes of this, I think I'm just going to leave it static there. And I also added a couple points in here just so it wasn't quite so uniform, just to make it look like it wasn't, you know, a perfect box. So let's just say that that's good enough for our piece of paper. And also on that same layer, I'm going to go ahead and create a line right here. You give it a stroke. I'm going to copy that line and paste it and rotate it to make an X. Oops. And obviously you could also do that with a text layer if you wanted to. And I'm going to draw a line across here, select both points on that line, U, give it a stroke, and I'm actually going to grab all of those points and move them up a little bit. And now I'm going to create a new text layer, and we'll just call this contract. And Frutiger bold we'll go with, and move that up to the top. And there's our contract. And now we're going to create a new vector layer, and I'm going to draw the pen, and we're going to create a pen that can be animated a bit. So I'm going to rename this layer pen, and I'm going to draw out another box layer, or another box, and we'll, just to differentiate this, we'll color it in a little bit. It's a little too dark. Okay. And up at the top, this is going to be the top of the pen, so I'm just going to add a point and then round it off. And then I'm going to connect these 2 points, add a point in the middle, and round it off the other way. You kind of have to mess with that one a little bit. Oops. There you go. Excuse me. So I'm going to grab that line and again give it a stroke. And then down here, because we want this pen to have a little bit of perspective, like we're looking down at it from the top a little bit, I'm going to grab the line at the bottom and hold Alt and squeeze it in a bit, and then add another point. This is going to be the pen tip, and down here we're going to connect these 2 points, round them off, and then we're going to do 2 more points here, connect them, and round those off as well. And again, we'll add, actually I'm going to grab all of these, hit U, and I'm going to give it both a fill and a stroke. And the fill on this we're going to make a little bit lighter. Okay. So that's our pen or pencil or whatever you want it to be. I think that's looking pretty good. Sorry if you hear my phone dinging during this. Probably getting emails from clients wondering why I'm not working on their projects and instead recording a tutorial, but they can wait. So we have the basic pen layer drawn, and I'm wondering if I might give it just a tiny bit less perspective there. Okay, that looks great. So we have our pen layer drawn, and now what we're going to do is we're going to add a bone layer, and we can call this pen as well, and we're going to drag the pen artwork into that bone layer. Now for the bone, we're going to add a couple of bones here, and I can't remember exactly how I did this, but it shouldn't be too difficult to figure it out. So first I'm going to draw out a control bone right here, and that's what I'm going to use to control the position. And then after I drag that out, I'm going to drag another one straight up, and that's what I'm going to use to control the left to right rotation. And then I'm going to drag another one out here, and this is what I'm going to use to control the perspective. And now that I'm looking at this, I realize that this curve up here is probably a little bit too prominent since I adjusted that perspective a little bit. That's probably better. Okay, so for this perspective bone, and you can name these if you want, but there's only 3 bones, so it's not really necessary. But just for to make this clear, this perspective bone, I'm going to give angle constraints, and because I'm going to use this with an action as a smart bone, and usually I like to have constraints on it just so I know where the action begins and ends, and I can't really go beyond that. Okay, so we'll say -90 and 0 is fine. All right, so what we can do now, we have the bones set up with bone influence, and I don't typically use that on stuff like this, kind of hard objects that aren't meant to deform. So you can see how that's deforming when I'm moving left to right, because it's being influenced by all of the bones in this layer. So there's a couple things I could do. I believe if I take the influence off of these bones, hit S to go to the influence tool and take it off of those bones, I believe that should now, yeah, so that doesn't deform anymore. You could also bind the points of this layer to that rotation bone if you want to, but it's up to you. I mean, for such a simple example, I might as well just use the bone influence. It's working fine. Okay, so now we're going to set up the perspective action for this pen, and I'm going to grab that perspective bone and hit Control K, and that brings up the actions window. And now the cool thing in the newest version of Moho is that you don't have to go in and name your actions and stuff. With that bone selected, the perspective bone, you can see if I just click this new action button, it automatically creates an action connected to that bone. So I'm going to hit OK. And over the course of, I usually like 48 frames is a good kind of medium point to do this kind of stuff. For something so simple, it could probably be less, but we'll just go 48 frames. Or, we could go up to 90 since this is 90 degrees, but it doesn't really matter for something like this. So over the course of 48 frames, I'm going to rotate that bone all the way down, and then we're going to grab the pen artwork layer, and we're going to adjust the artwork to make it look like it's getting some perspective there. So we're going to bring it down, widen it out, bring that top and bottom curve, make those a little more prominent, and then we can bring this curve down, maybe bring that tip up a little bit, maybe go down like that. I'm going to turn off the the bones so we can see how this looks. So you see how when you go, when that perspective bone is moved, it looks like you're getting a little bit more perspective there, like the pen is tilting towards you. And we could probably push that even more. I'm going to try here and see how far I can push that. Just as an experiment. In my version for that project, I did not push it quite this far, but we'll see how much we can get away with here. Okay, widen these points out a little bit maybe. Bring this even further down. That might be a bit extreme, but let's see. That works okay. I mean, you can tell up at the top here it's getting a little distorted. That's probably not the most realistic look, so we can go in and adjust it. I don't know exactly what the fix would be here. A lot of this stuff, for me, when I'm trying to figure out perspective with smart bones and stuff, it's just a little bit of trial and error. Just trying to figure out what might work best. I think maybe that goes a little bit further down. All right, so I'm generally I'm generally cool with that. I think it looks pretty good for what we're doing here. So that bone. That perspective bone sets up the action. Now we can go back out to the main line and we can turn our bones back on. And let's go to frame 1 and start moving some of this stuff around and making sure it works okay. So if we use the translate key, we can grab this bottom bone and move the position around. And then with the manipulate bones tool or the translate key, because you can use that to rotate as well, we can rotate left and right. And then with the perspective tool, we can add perspective. So now we have kind of the three necessary actions there for animating this pen drawing on, right? We're not quite done with the contract yet. We're going to create one more vector layer. And this is going to be the signature that's going to draw on. And I'm using my pen tablet here, and I'm going to take off auto weld. And you can mess around with these settings all you want. You can use pen pressure if you want or not. It just depends on what you want the signature to look like. And you can even, if you don't feel like using a pen tablet or you don't have one, you can do this by hand too. I just find it's kind of quick to use my pen tablet. So I'm just going to, accidentally drew a line there. I'm going to draw out a quick quick signature there. And you know what? I did that on frame 1, but it's okay. It doesn't matter. Usually it's best to draw that stuff on frame 0, but I messed up and I did it on frame 1. No big deal. All right, so what's going to happen now is over the course of however many frames you determine, we're going to use this stroke exposure tool on the left-hand side here. So what this does, I'm actually going to take the last name of the signature and I'm going to put it on its own layer so we have independent control over the first name and the last name. And let's go ahead and rename these. Now you could keep these on the same layer. I just think it's easier to stay organized if I have them on separate layers. Otherwise the timeline gets a little confusing. So, all right, so we're going to use this stroke exposure tool, and sometimes this doesn't animate the way you want. So for this one, I'm clicking and dragging backwards, and it's animating backwards, which incidentally is what I want. But when I did this the first time, it was going the opposite direction. So when that happens, you just have to mess with the start percentage and the end percentage numbers in the upper toolbar here. And you can use those to have it animate any direction you want. So if it's going the wrong direction, you just put your start percentage up at 100 and animate backward. But in this case, it looks like it's going the correct way. So I'm going to start this animation on, let's say, frame 6. And I'm going to click and drag with the stroke exposure tool the opposite direction so that it drags out the correct way. So on frame 6, we have it down at 0. And then let's say at frame 24 is fine. We'll drag it out the opposite way. And then for the last name, we're going to do the same thing. Let's go back to frame 1, and we're going to drag this back to 0. And then it's going to hold that until the first name is finished. So let's say frame 27. We're just going to create another keyframe there I'm just dragging it out a little bit, then dragging it back to 0. That way over this frame 1 to frame 27, it just holds an empty stroke. Now we're going to go out to frame, whatever, 42 is fine. We're going to drag out the opposite way, and that finishes the stroke. So the stroke exposure tool is really easy to use. I'm kind of zoned out there, and I'm not sure if I explained it correctly, but basically all you're doing is you're selecting the stroke and dragging left or right, and that animates the stroke on or off. It's really easy. So if we watch this now, I'm going to Alt right click on frame 48 just so that's the looping looping region, and we're going to watch this, and that's how it drags out with the stroke exposure tool. So now all we have to do is we have to bring the pen back on, and we can animate the pen kind of following those strokes. Let's start on frame 1. We'll start to the left over here, and we need to be at the beginning of that stroke because it starts drawing on by frame 7. So we'll move the pen over here, and right now I'm just kind of messing with the position. So I'm going to go forward a bunch of frames there and move the pen down, and then we can split the difference and find where the middle is. So between frame 6, where the pen is at the beginning of the stroke, and frame 14, where it's at the end of that C, we're just going to split the difference and find where it is there. And a lot of times you can be as accurate as you want with this. A lot of times it goes so fast that you don't really have to worry about it. But just for the sake of this, I'm going to be a little bit accurate here. And I'm going to follow this stroke along as it animates. And then we'll go back through between these keyframes that I'm creating and adjust it accordingly. So I'm just going to go ahead and fast forward through this here. You get the idea. All I'm doing is, moving a bunch of frames forward, adjusting the position of the pen to match the stroke, and then I'm going back and splitting the difference between those frames to get it to match a little closer. Okay, and then once it's done with the signature there, we're just going to bring it off to the side. And let's watch that and see how it looks. Turn off the... Okay, so there you go. You have it kind of writing on there, and it could be cleaned up a little bit, but I think that's fine for now. So now what we're going to do is we're going to grab the other bones, and we're just going to give them a little bit of variation as it's writing. So, you know, I'm going to go every few frames and kind of rotate it a little bit just to get some variation. And you could be as scientific as you want with this and figure out, well, you know, if he's drawing a stroke in this direction, maybe the pen would be tilting this way, but I don't think it really matters all that much. So we have a little bit of variation with the way it rotates left and right there, and now we're going to add some variation with the perspective. So grabbing that perspective bone, and we're just going back and forth to different degrees here, just to give it a little bit of dimension and a little bit of variation. And we'll see how that looks. So that looks pretty good. I think I would like to make the variation in rotation maybe a little bit more erratic, a little bit faster as it goes between these different points. Grab the right tool here. So just kind of finessing a little bit now and changing it up. Let's see how that looks. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Now what I want to do is, just because I did this in my original example as I was transitioning into and out of a scene, I figure I'd show you real quick that you can grab all this stuff, go back to frame 0, put it in a group layer, so you can go with group with selection. And I kind of animated this, you know, starting out a little bit away from the camera. So I rotated it a little bit, and then if you want to animate the depth away from the camera, on the Move Layer tool, you just hold the Alt button and you click and drag, and that'll bring it further away or closer in. So for my animation, I kind of brought it through the camera, kind of like that, and then transition to the next scene. So let's see how that looks. Maybe slow that down a little bit so we get the whole thing there. So that's how that worked, and you know, you can also adjust the well, that's really far out there, but I can adjust the rotation up here as well, up in the toolbar, so it's kind of rotating as it's doing that as well. I think I'd bring those keyframes even a little further out. I want to make sure you catch the whole animation of the pen writing on. So that's the basics of how to do that. So I showed you, how to use the stroke exposure tool, how to use actions on bones to create a little bit of perspective on the pen. And obviously this was just kind of a quick and dirty job, but you can make this look as cool as you want. And use these techniques for a lot of other projects. But that was just another Moho quick tip. I think I said this last week, but I'm probably going to jump back into After Effects for a tutorial next week. Just been very busy this week, and I had Moho open and was working in it quite a bit, so I figured this would be a cool quick tip to show you. All right, so thanks again for watching, guys. If you like these tutorials, please do subscribe. I appreciate it, and don't forget to check out the blog, motionapprentice.com, where I post a lot of stuff that you'll never see here. So, all right, thanks, guys. Take care. Bye.